Karn. I am your host, Brad Schmidt. Thanks for joining me this afternoon. 501-403-KARN, 501-403-5276 if you'd like to be a part of the discussion today, because especially today, it is a more fun day to be on radio because it's Free Speech Friday. So anything you want to talk about today is fair game, and we will talk about any of it and all of it and none of it, honestly. If you decide you don't want to and you want to just change the subject, you can do that too. I had to fix the camera here. I don't know what happened. We were way off kilter there, but we got the camera up and running again as well. We got our Twitter conundrum fixed up here, and so we're back on Twitter on the KRN. It's just at News Radio 1029. If you wanna follow along. Also, we've got our YouTube channel. We've got up on the KRN website as well, newsradio1029.com, and you can check us out in all of those places, at least for the first 20 minutes. That's usually all I do with the video stuff here. So anyway, 501-403-KRN is the number. That's 501-403-5276, and it is Free Speech Friday, but there's a lot to talk about. We got a lot to get to. Attorney General Tim Griffin has joined, I believe, 13 other states backing Texas in their challenge of an overtime rule. Essentially, the overtime rule, it's the Biden administration has chosen to change the threshold for salary level that would make you eligible for overtime pay. It's related to the way the Labor Department views salaried versus hourly positions, and they said at a certain wage level, if you are a salaried position, you suddenly become eligible for overtime pay, as opposed to just your standard, you agreed to work for us for this many hours at this rate. And so there's some anger about that. We'll get into that discussion today. I'm going to be honest, I have been a salaried employee for, quite some time now. It's been at least 10 years that I've been doing radio. I mean, I had a few other jobs that were part-time jobs when I was using it to support my radio habit before I got into full-time radio. And they were hourly, but I never worked enough hours, I guess, to be on overtime because of just because of the nature of it being technically a full-time job, but I also had a full-time radio job as well. So yeah, we'll there's a lot to talk about there. Some folks upset, claiming that Griffin is just siding with big businesses and all of that, but it's not just about the big businesses, because this affects small businesses and family-owned businesses as well. And they're struggling. And there are a lot of small family-owned businesses that will be affected by this, and they'll face some genuine, legitimate hardship because of this, and not so much that they won't be able to pay the employees kind of thing, but it may end up meaning that we just don't hire another person, or we have to let someone go, and we have to pare down our workforce. And so this is always the trade-off when you start talking about minimum wage laws and dealing with salary laws and the government getting involved in forcing businesses to be required to pay a certain level of salary. Because anytime that happens, businesses have to think through this. I mean, think for a moment. Just think of a small town, rural Arkansas kind of community. They don't have, McDonald's and Wendy's and Burger King and all of that, but they do have a small cafe, a small diner. And because that small diner doesn't have the buying power of a place like McDonald's or Wendy's or some of these other kind of big corporate fast food places, they have to purchase their products and their supplies from a local restaurant distributor, and it just costs more. McDonald's, because they're buying, 1 million tons of beef every year, they can get it much cheaper than, mom and pop's diner in some rural community in middle America. So they have to pay more. Their expenses are more. Their plastic cups cost more. Their napkins cost more. All of that kind of stuff. So they aren't able to absorb some of the cost that a place like McDonald's would be. So they've got a couple of high school kids that work for them in the evenings and a few others that work on the weekend. And they're high school kids. They're not making, lifelong career level salaries, but they're getting a few bucks, and they're earning, we'll just say $12 an hour. And that's pretty much the maximum that the little local diner can afford to pay, is that $12 an hour. And they've got 4 workers that they pay that $12 an hour for, say, 20 hours a week, because they're all part-time. Now the government comes along and says you are required by law to pay your workers $18 an hour. Well, suddenly the cost of labor for that company goes up by $6 an hour per employee, which is 4 employees, as I just mentioned, times 20 hours every week. And now that labor cost for each employee goes up by $480. Now, that business has to figure out how to cover that cost. They either have to raise their prices, they have to, cut back on supplies, charge extra for ketchup packets, or whatever other thing they have to do to cover that $480 a week in excess labor that they weren't having to pay before. The other thing they may have to do is simply say, look, we just can't afford to have 4 employees anymore at $18 an hour. We unfortunately can only afford 2 employees at $18 an hour. And that $24 an hour in extra labor per hour is actually now reduced, because instead of paying 4 times 12 at $48 an hour, they're paying 2 times 18 at $36 an hour. So the business ends up actually pocketing $12 an hour because they released 2 employees. And now those 2 employees are having to work more shifts. They're having to maybe work more hours, but they're still not going to get overtime because the employee or the company definitely can't afford to pay the overtime rate. And so now 2 kids are out of a job. The business is actually pocketing more money than they were making before. And the 2 remaining employees are working harder than ever before. So is it really good for the employees to force such a level of minimum wage increase? Now, that's not necessarily directly related to this overtime suit, but you see how there's a balancing act there. And every business owner, especially small business owners and family-owned businesses, they have to consider all of this every single day. They have to work with this kind of stuff all the time. And so these decisions by the government to raise requirements for wages, to raise requirements for overtime pay, to do all this kind of stuff, every time they get involved, business owners are affected by it. And it's not just McDonald's, and it's not just Wendy's and Burger King. In fact, those big corporations, like I said, because they're buying, literally millions of tons of beef every year, they're buying millions of paper cups and millions of napkins and millions of plastic trays and all of the things that they buy. They're able to get it at a much greater discount. So that minimum wage requirement really doesn't affect those big corporations all that much at all. They're able to absorb the cost. They still make their, maybe this year instead of making $3 billion in profit, they only make $2 billion, but they still make their profits. But the other thing they do is they still raise the prices because they're not just going to give up $1 billion in profit at the end of the year. They're going to raise their prices. They're going to charge extra for ketchup. They're going to charge extra for cheese. They're going to charge extra for all those things. And so the prices go up, small businesses get crushed, and more big corporations continue to take over and push the little guy out. So these, again, these kinds of choices of the government getting involved are never done in a vacuum. So anyway, there's that. There's more to get to today. That's just one of the things I decided to rant about for a little bit as we open up the show. It is Free Speech Friday. Anything you want to talk about is fair game. We'll get to it all as we continue next on News Radio 102.9 KARN.